Welcome to the Crosscheck, the squawk sheet that uncovers the stories, challenges, and careers shaping business aviation today. I'm your host, Rob Hoffman.
And I'm Ian Long.
Today we're joined by Lauren Baum, a seasoned Part 91 cabin attendant, mentor, and founder of Cabin in the Sky, a resource for cabin attendant career development. Lauren has dedicated her career to elevating service standards and guiding the next generation of private aviation professionals. Let's dive into her journey and the insights she brings to the industry. Lauren, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this for a while.
Well, it's great to have you here. Let's see if we can have some fun today. You've cut your teeth as a cabin attendant in Part 91, but you got your start in hospitality. Why don't you tell us about your journey that got you to where you are today?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, I've been listening to some of these episodes and Joe People's podcast as well. And I thought I was the only one who had a background in sports. And that seems to be sort of a common thread with women in this industry, funny enough. So I went to Ohio State. And I got my master's at Cincinnati. And from the time I was 5 years old, I wanted to be Jerry Maguire. I wanted to be Sage Steele, Samantha Ponder. Those are people who I idolized. And that was what my plan was always going to be, growing up down the street from the Football Hall of Fame. I mean, it's a no-brainer there. So, I went through school and I realized I actually didn't want to do that anymore. I think that when you do something for so long, so young, it's easy to get burnt out. And that's where I was. So it was a tough decision to make after I graduated too. And I was like, wow, I guess I don't want to do this. And I had to eat a little bit of slice of humble pie. I was at that age where you're about to get kicked off your parents' insurance and you need to figure it out. So at that time, I was like, you know what? Okay, I'm going to get a job at Starbucks. I can have benefits, work full time until I can kind of figure out what I want to do. And as it turned out, I actually really liked that job. It was fun. I made great money. I met a lot of people and I learned more than you can imagine about people and service, business, logistics, and things like that. Everyone has their COVID story. Mine was COVID hit and completely changed the landscape of that job. And I will never forget the moment where it was November of 2020 and I was sitting at home scrolling through social media as we do. And I saw a friend from high school. She was doing this job and I looked a little bit more into it and I said, really? I said, well, I'm miserable right now at my job. I'm sick of coming home, being somebody who I don't even want to be around myself. And I said, you know what do I have to lose? And I'm a firm believer that when you have an idea, the shorter amount of time between actually executing on that idea, the more likely you are to do it.
Yeah.
So
Like strike while the iron's hot, that's for sure.
exactly, and I single, didn't have kids. Why not? So I set myself to training kind of under the radar. I didn't really tell anybody what I was doing because what if it doesn't work out? And I didn't really want any distraction. So went to training. And as soon as I got back from training, actually in the B terminal of the Phoenix airport, I started a blog because I had always been a writer. So I was like, you know what? That's where Cabins in the Sky started. I was like, I'm just going to blog my way through this industry. And I turned networking into a full-time job. I mean, it was every minute that I wasn't at work or doing something that was non-negotiable, I was on LinkedIn. I was figuring out who the companies were in my area. And I was just learning because I didn't have a background in aviation. So I was trying to figure out what skills I had that were applicable to this new industry. I quickly realized that networking was pretty high up there on the list of priorities. So about 6 weeks later, I had networked myself into my first flight. And a few weeks later, shortly after that, I connected with a gentleman who was working at Wheels Up at the time, which based in Cincinnati. And I sent him a message and I was like, you know what? Can I pick your brain? Do you have 5 minutes? I want to learn. I want to know. He said, absolutely. He called me and he picked up the phone and said, Lauren, I know exactly who you are. I said, excuse me? He goes, you manage the Starbucks over at Mall Road by the airport. And my mouth dry. I said, yeah, that's me. And funny enough, it was sort of serendipitous with the right timing. They were hiring cabin attendants and I was able to get into an interview and I started flying full time shortly after that. The account that I had done my very first flight for, I had stayed in touch with them because again, I was new and there was only a few people who I really knew in the industry. And one of those pilots was brilliant. I mean, he's super smart guy, been in the industry forever. And I stayed in touch and they said, okay, we're going to be getting this new aircraft in a year from now. We will not fly it without a cabin attendant. And if that's something that you're interested in, please stay in touch. Of course. So August rolled around of that year and he said, hey, are you still interested in that job? I said, absolutely. So almost a year to the day of me working at Wheels Up, I started my current job that I have now, which is flying for an unbelievable family, fantastic crew. It's my unicorn. So that's how I got here.
All right. So you got your start with 135 and here you are
Yeah,
now at 91. There have to be a lot of differences. Why don't you tell us the pros and cons of working, with each operation?
absolutely. I tell this to every single person who comes through one of my mentorship programs and one-on-ones that without the experience of working a 135 operation, I could have never done the job that I have now. I think there's something to be said for grinding it out a little bit and learning how to work with a lot of different crews and be on the ball. Things change so quickly in 135, so you have to be able to adapt, think on your feet, problem solve, and everything of that nature. And for some people that's a con. I think that's a pro. I think that if you want to get a ton of experience quickly, that's a great way to go. I think if you're somebody who likes to know your schedule, if you like a little bit of security, in whatever capacity that is in our industry, that's a fantastic route to go. I see a lot of new cabin attendants and they all say, I want to work for a family. I want to do a Part 91. As true as that may be, there are some things that you need to consider when you do go that route that aren't always at the forefront of your mind. Every Part 91 account is different. I mean, it's from the people you fly, their expectations, the trips you take, the type of aircraft, and everything like that. So I think if you are somebody who is extremely independent, a Part 91 account could be perfect for you. If you like a little bit more structure, I would consider a 135. I think when I started this, I was the first full-time cabin attendant, so the position was a little bit ambiguous as far as what the owners were expecting, what the crew was expecting out of me. And I remember clear as day, when I was hired, they said, this is your position to make your own. And I developed an entirely new sense of ownership because of that. So as far as the pros and cons go, I think it really just depends on what you're looking for out of life and out of the job. I think my Part 91 is an adventure. I think there are some people who could probably take that job and say, not for me, for whatever reason that is. But I couldn't be happier. I think your job is certainly what you make it. I know that when I was working 135, I felt moments of getting a little bit complacent because you get into your routine. It's like okay, I'm airlining in and this is when my rotation starts and this is when it ends. And you very much get into a routine that if you don't recognize it, you will get very complacent quickly. That's my opinion on that. And that's how I felt. So every person's a little bit different.
So the role of cabin attendant is you've got to balance safety and hospitality, right?
Yeah.
But can you talk to us more about the qualities that make a great cabin attendant?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love this question because most of the qualities aren't necessarily tangible, right? Having a background in culinary, that's great. That's fantastic. But I think it's a lot of intrinsic qualities that make some of the best cabin attendants. I think those who are disciplined will go very, very far in this job. Discipline from knowing the rules and regulations, having confidence in yourself and your abilities, your knowledge of safety standards, operations in general. I think a skill that I have had to learn, and it's never going to be perfected, discernment. Having a high level of discernment as a cabin attendant is invaluable. You come across a lot of different kind of people and you are exposed to quite a bit of information, whether you realize it or not, and how you navigate what you know and how to use it or don't use it and things like that, because of the privacy aspect of what we do is really important as well. I touched on confidence, but I think confidence is extremely important. You have to be able to walk into that cabin and your guests and crew have to trust you immediately, even if they don't know you. I mean, they are putting a great deal of responsibility on you. If something were to go wrong, the pilots are in the cockpit, you're in the back. They always say from the cockpit back, that's yours, Lauren. And you have to take a lot of ownership in that and take yourself very, very seriously.
Awesome. I mean, there's a lot to take home from that. I do want to switch gears just a little bit and talk more about cabins in the sky. So you want to dig into the gap of mentorship and training for aspiring cabin attendants?
Absolutely. Social media has given so much more awareness to this industry and this job, certainly from a cabin attendant's perspective. And I used Cabins in the Sky to start sharing information, what I knew, catering, tips, tricks, hotels, what I've experienced, best practices and things like that. And I started to get a lot of people reaching out to me, asking for a little bit more than just social media. How did you get started? And what does this look like? And what do I do? And there are some fantastic mentors out there as well. But what I found is that the gap between going to training and actually starting your career, it's pretty wide. And, that you go to training and they say, all right, good luck, guys. And there's not really a bridge between that. So that's what I try to be as far as new cabin attendants go. I try to give them best practices and not even just like getting your first flight, because I think there is a misconception that it's like, okay, let me just get my first flight. But really, it's like you need to build a career, because it doesn't matter if you get 1 or 2 flights. What does that do for you if you aren't building a foundation of a career, whether it be your resume and networking, how to professionally show up, how to be in person and hold your own, and whether it's in an interview or a networking event and things of that nature. So that's really the core of Cabins in the Sky. It's professionalism, it's building careers for yourself. And I also work with cabin attendants who have been in this longer than me. I think what I find is it's really easy to get stagnant. You know, they'll go years without updating a resume, or they won't be involved in their local aviation group because they don't even know what it is. And I'm the first one to say, and I'll talk about it until I'm blue in the face, you have to network. I know Ian has an amazing networking group on LinkedIn and in WhatsApp, and his Zoom calls every other week. And you have to get in front of people. It doesn't matter what your qualifications are if people don't know who you are. So that's I suppose, a pillar of what Cabins in the Sky is. And as far as my vision goes, you know, it's not all over the place, but there's a lot of arms with it, what I want to do. I've done consulting work with flight departments. I help staff cabin attendants for flight departments and people who are looking for that right fit, because that's a huge piece of, you know, staffing a cabin attendant. It's being the right fit for that company, that account, that crew, and everything like that. I've had the privilege with my account to really experience a lot of different facets of this industry: design and speccing and completion of aircrafts, taking delivery, hangar building and design and management. You know, there's so much about this industry that fascinates me and that I'm curious about, and I want to know more.
That's awesome. Let's talk about the blog. You share a lot of fun stories with Cabins in the Sky. Let's talk about that a little bit.
You know, when you don't necessarily, you're a little bit faking it till you make it. I've done some of the dumb things, and I'm trying to help people avoid it. There's a couple silly things that I did when I first started that, didn't love that. I will never forget this story. I'd probably been on this new account maybe a month or so, and we did a trip. And I was still commuting, and we had an empty leg. And I asked one of the pilots, I said, hey, do you mind if I, throw on some leggings? God, I can't even, this is embarrassing. Do you mind if I throw on some leggings? It's empty, and, we're going to land, and then we're going to go to the hotel. And he looked at me and said, yeah, Lauren, I mean, if that's how you want to look walking through the FBO. And I stood there for a second and I said, understood. And I didn't change. And I think about that all the time as far as ownership and everything like that goes. I think about, the nights where I probably stayed awake a little too long before I had to fly the next day, or not preparing the same way, or not taking a flight as seriously because it felt so mundane and routine. And I am a very different person, a very different cabin attendant than I was a couple years ago. I can say that for sure.
That's a fun recollection. Obviously cringeworthy in the moment, but something that has shaped you. How has that played into what you do now and what you tell people specifically? Is there anything, details that you want to dig into on that?
I think this industry requires you to have such a thick skin, not only in like the critique of yourself, because I'm a firm believer that we are our own worst critics, but we have to be able to take feedback. We have to be able to reflect on whether it's a flight that maybe didn't go well or went really well. We have to be able to look back on that and then take that feedback in stride and not be so offended by feedback that somebody gives you. I think it's almost like people get really defensive about it. And I think having that thick skin is really, really important as far as like building your brand goes and learning more and getting better. Because if you can't reflect back and you can't think about it in that way, you're never going to get better, because you're always going to think, okay, this is good. I'm good. You have to be able to nitpick at yourself a little bit. And I'm not necessarily saying that's perfection, although I am a perfectionist. I'm working on it. But, you have to be able to look at it through that objective lens.
Nice.
Obviously, you share your personal brand with everyone, and I really found your blogs really entertaining. I actually love also the why every group of friends needs a flight attendant.
That's a good one.
By the way, I second that, because every flight attendant I've ever met, much bigger personalities than the guys and ladies up front. So I'll say the personality tends to be in the rear of the aircraft. So why don't you just elaborate really quickly on that one?
Oh, yeah, we're great friends to have. Every flight attendant is different, but we do have a lot of like very similar qualities. I think that because of the nature of our job of just like, okay, let's up and go, we are very down for any activity that you bring up. We're like, probably, yeah, sounds good. Let's do it. I think that not much scares us. when I was getting interviewed for my first job, there was a question about, okay, if we dropped you in the middle of this city in this country, how would you get catering and how would you navigate? There's not much. We're like, okay, throw me into Munich for the first time, throw me into, somewhere in Asia. We'll figure it out, right? And I think that's like a we'll figure it out kind of attitude, which is pretty fun. And also, we have stories. You want to, and it's such a fine line too that I found, and something cringy I used to do was the way I would talk about work because I was so excited. It wasn't from a conceited place, but it's easy to talk about these stories when you're in groups of other aviation people, but when you're not in a group of aviation people, talking about, oh yeah, I was just in Paris. Oh my gosh, this hotel in Budapest, it's amazing. I had this fantastic, all these things. I'm like, I don't even know what to say. I don't even know how to respond to that. So we always have stories if you are willing to listen to that.
And, ironically, I've been listening to on and off for years, Betty in the Sky, flight
Yeah,
attendant who
yeah.
shares her stories. Might as well be sitting next to her at a bar. It's the same thing. There's so many stories for her to share. Now,
Yeah.
This is a real question, though. Is that a requirement to get you ahead as a flight attendant, having a big personality, especially in Part 91 or 135 operations?
So I think to answer that question, it depends on who you're working for. You have to be able to read the room, I suppose. You have to be a chameleon in that you can have that big personality if the account and that guest requires that and warrants it. Or you have to be able to tone it down tremendously if that's what the room requires as well. And that's something I've learned because I do have a big personality. I recognize that. I know that I have to rein it in a lot. And I actually, speaking of feedback, some of the feedback that I received when I very first started on this account was, she's chatty. Or something about she's really chatty, or she's got a lot to say, something about that. So you have to be able to be both people depending on what the situation warrants. And I think that's a pretty unique skill set to have.
Turn it on.
Yeah, definitely the EQ comes into factor over here with this for sure.
Absolutely.
All right, and on that note, let's talk about the evolving role of cabin attendants in private aviation. Where are we going with this right now? Who's the ideal flight attendant? Who should be kind of listen to this podcast right now and go, that's me. That's the future. That's where things are going.
So when I think about somebody who would make an ideal cabin attendant, first and foremost, there's somebody who's teachable. You have to be able to be a student all the time because with this particular job, there's always going to be something new that you can learn, whether it is your culinary skills or advanced service skills or more languages to add to your toolkit or whatever that might be. You need to be able to always learn and continue to enrich yourself. You're going to get bored otherwise. Another quality that would make an ideal cabin attendant is somebody who genuinely likes to serve, somebody who gets intrinsic motivation from making people happy. And I'm not even saying from a people pleaser standpoint, but somebody who loves to serve, not necessarily serve meals, but create an environment and an experience for somebody. I think that's something that really ignites me, being able to do a trip for a family and whatever the theme is or whatever the notion is behind that trip, to be able to provide that experience for them. I think it's somebody who has quiet confidence. Quiet confidence is something that I'm still learning, but somebody who I really look up to, Heidi Cole, she talks about it all the time, and she is the perfect example of it, to where it's somewhat soft-spoken, but you hang on her every word, right? She's wonderful, and she's a great example of that. So I think having quiet confidence is great as well. It's not flashy, it's not showy, it's not completely in your face, but it exists. I also think another great quality to have is you have to be able to relax, because if you can't roll with the punches as things change, as departure times change and locations and catering requests and manifests and everything like that. You have to be able to roll with it. And on the flip side, you also have to take yourself seriously enough to realize this is not a job that's for clout. This is not a job for you to just travel the world and stay in these hotels and have all these experiences, because at the end of the day, you are working for a company. You are working for somebody, and you need to take that responsibility that you hold very, very seriously. We go to training every single year, and every year something just like light bulb goes off a little bit different. So you need to be able to, hold that sacred to you.
It's not just service though, right? It's the safety and the security of it too. That's a huge part of what you do, right?
Yeah.
Touch on that a little bit, kind of catering your personalized service into being discreet and making sure that everyone's doing what they need to do to fly safely and get to where they need to be.
You know, champagne and caviar aren't going to save you when somebody in the back is going through, you know, an anaphylactic shock, or there is a major weather system going through and you're flying through it, around it, or diverting, and whatever that situation looks like. You know, service is all good and fine, but if you don't know what your plan is, and you better have 5 plans for it, it's not going to go well. So balancing service and safety is tough, but I think a huge piece of that is CRM. I know that myself and my pilots, we are always on the same page, especially when it comes to pre-flight briefings and knowing what we're walking into, the airports we're going to, the weather, the flight time, just all those different things that go into it play a role in my safety. You know, from the timing of maybe when I serve meals or when I start, you know, clearing the cabin and preparing it for departure and things like that. So to balance it all together, you know, having good CRM is huge when it comes to that. And I am certain that CRM has saved our butts a few times.
So, for the aspiring flight attendants out there, can you give us a first couple of steps that they need to take sort of get into this world where you are right now? Obviously, you give us a lot of tips on how to succeed,
Sure.
but how does it all start?
It starts with doing your research, truly. And I'm not saying go on a Facebook group and say, how do I get started? Because I think that question gets asked at least 10 times a day on every single Facebook group that I'm in. I mean, really do some research on the industry. What does the market look like? What are, you know, the difference between a Part 91 and a 135? Different management companies. What is a management company? Because a lot of times I get cabin attendants who come right out of training, and this isn't necessarily their fault, but a lot of the terminology, they don't even know the difference between a Part 91 and a 135. You know, there's some real, they don't know their phonetic alphabets. So learn some of the basics. I think that's something I wish I would have done when I first started. So just do some research. Also understand that safety training, you have to have it. Whether the company that you are aspiring to work for requires it or not, you need it for your own safety and your peace of mind and your skill set. And to be honest, I would say 90% of companies require you to have FACS or flight safety anyway. So understand that that's going to be an investment. One of the, I think, hesitations with people in training is that they don't want to spend the money on it. They want to get somebody to pay it for them. And of course, there's scholarships and different means and things like that. But I mean, it's a drop in the bucket compared to what the potential of this industry is. So do some research, send yourself to safety training. And after that, network like your life depends on it. Go to your local aviation groups. Get on Google. It's a Google search, you know, and that's, I get on one-on-one calls with people and I'm like, remind me where you're at. I Google it real quick and I give them a list of 3 or 4 different groups that are available within an hour of them. You know what I mean? This isn't like secret knowledge. This isn't, you know, hidden information. It's all out there. You just have to be a self-starter when it comes to that. So I think the first 3 things would absolutely be do some research, send yourself to training, start networking. And I also think a mentor, you know, and I'm not saying this is like a self-serving piece, but a mentor is a huge piece of some people's success. You know, it's a little bit of the hand holding, and that's okay. I think finding a mentor who you admire in the way that you see what they're doing and you say, I want to do that. Find somebody who's been where you want to go. I think that's really important as well. And I think those 4 steps will take you very, very far, but they require a lot of effort on your part. Nobody's going to drag your hand to flight safety in Savannah and say, okay, here you go to training. Nobody's going to carry you into your Orba roundtable meeting so that you can meet people. It requires a lot of effort on your part. And I think that's where I find that people maybe don't find the success that they're looking for.
And as far as your consultancy services through Cabins in the Sky, are you speaking one-on-one with aspiring flight attendants, or who are your typical clients?
Yeah, so there's quite a bit of a range. I would say at least half of them are cabin attendants who have just gone to safety training. I do speak to a group of people who they're trying to figure out those steps, right? So they come to me and they say, okay, Lauren, let's lay out a game plan. But the vast majority of people I talk to have just gone to training or have been out of training for a couple months and they're not gaining that traction that they're looking for. I have a few different options. I do individual one-on-ones where it's just me and that person and they send me what they want to talk about and we work through all of it in very, very detailed form, and it's very personal to them. I also have a more robust program that's 4 weeks, and it's every single week we have a schedule of what we're talking about, and it kind of builds every single week as far as what the homework looks like. And to be able to do the next week, you have to complete the homework. You have to do, you know, it's step 1, step 2, 3, and 4. And, again, that's catered to depending on what that person is going through at the moment. I've had people who they get their first flights in the middle of the program, and then we kind of have to change things up a little bit, but that's okay. It's meant to be. It's supposed to be tailored to that person that I'm talking to.
Wonderful. All right. So we're coming up on time right now, but this is my favorite section right now. Ian, I'm going to let you take it away from here right now. Rapid fire. Ian, go for it.
What's your favorite aircraft to work on?
So I am partial to our G500. I absolutely love that aircraft. The galley is unbelievable. It has so much storage and the counter is so deep. I just absolutely love it from that standpoint. I also think it's an unbelievable airplane. It's so fast. It's sleek. The way the interior is designed, G500 thus far.
Easy win, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Essential travel item. What do you always have with you?
I always have, there's a couple things, but one of the things I always have is my universal charger. You don't always know where you're going to end up. And it's a terrible feeling to potentially end up in, I don't know, like Germany, and you don't have a charger, so you can't charge it, all those things. So I always have that. I also always have my Cabins in the Sky notebook. There you go. Because I write and I need to write ideas down. I need to write catering lists. I'm not somebody who uses my notes app that often. I'm like a pen and paper kind of person. So those are two things that are always with me.
And pen and paper all the way. I appreciate that myself as well. Last one here. What's your most memorable in-flight experience?
Okay, no brainer. So
without breaking any NDAs, of course.
Yeah. So we were on a trip and we got a call and I thought it was a joke. And they said, "Can you do a trip for this celebrity?" And my heart about dropped. I was like, no, it's somebody else with that name, right? Yeah, so we did a trip for somebody who, he's an OG. Unbelievable. And I tell you what, one of the nicest people I've ever met. Them and their family, I adore them. Not to spill anything from that, but I will never forget that trip. I remember the drinks that I made.
That's a nice little perk when you're when you're flying 135 and 91 every once in a while. You get to rub elbows with someone that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, that was pretty amazing. And I look back on it, and it's one of those things where, especially in our job, I still think about conversations I had with guests like 2 or 3 years ago. Did they remember I said? Did they think that was weird? What do you think they thought I meant when I said? I still think about that trip.
That's fun. I know sometimes you meet your idol or somebody that you've looked up to or thought about or seen publicly, and maybe they don't show up the way that you expected them to, but that sounds like that experience was not that, and that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Because
never meet your heroes is something that I've heard.
No, I agree with that. They can only disappoint, right? I mean, they can only live up to the standard that you think that they are, and if it's not that, they can disappoint you. I'm like, all right, so much for that person.
I know. There's somebody who works in sports that I would do anything to fly them. And then I was talking to my pilots about it and they said, "No way. I do not. You don't want to do." I'm like, "Yes, I do."
Not everyone has the same private persona as their public persona. Some do, some don't. It's definitely a roll of the dice.
Yeah.
Lauren, where can the listeners at home find you on social media if they want to hear more or potentially engage you with your services?
Absolutely. So my Instagram is pretty active. I'm on there probably more than I should be. It's at Cabins in the Sky. Facebook is the exact same. It's at Cabins in the Sky. I'm also on LinkedIn, my personal LinkedIn, as well as my business. And my website is Cabins in the Sky. It's all one word. mykajabi, KAJABI.com.
And we'll be sure to leave a link to that in the show notes.
Absolutely.
All right. Wonderful. Lauren, thank you so much for sharing your invaluable insight and experiences with us. I really appreciate you having on the show.
Oh, I was so happy to be here. It was a pleasure to meet you, Rob. And I've talked to Ian quite a bit. So no, you do a wonderful job on your podcast. I've been listening to the episodes, so people should be excited to listen to these.
Wonderful. Music to my ears. I love to hear that. I guess we're doing at least somewhat of a good job. That's really, really wonderful and inspiring for us to keep the show going. And speaking of today's show, if you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and follow us on your favorite podcast platform and share this episode with a colleague or friend. Your review or feedback is greatly appreciated and helps us spread the word. We will see you all next week with a new episode of The Crosscheck.